It was something I saw on the screen that made me collapse on the floor and remain there for what felt like an eternity. My name is Luke. I'm 38 years old and have been living in Waikiki, Honolulu for the past decade. 8 of those years were spent married to Melinda, a woman I genuinely believed was the love of my life. She was beautiful in that effortless way that didn't require much effort. Her natural elegance combined with a subtle fragrance that seemed to follow her everywhere. That scent was one of the things that first attracted me to her. She worked as a perfumist at a small niche boutique near our apartment, and I managed sales for a company that specialized in tourist equipment. Tents, backpacks, camping gear, climbing equipment, all the things people needed when they wanted to escape their ordinary lives and find something extraordinary in nature or adventure. Living in Hawaii meant my business thrived. Tourists were constantly looking for that next great experience, that perfect piece of equipment that would make their island vacation unforgettable. I was good at what I did. I understood the psychology of travel, the desire for exploration, the need to feel alive in a place you'd never been before. I made decent money, around $70,000 a year, enough to support a comfortable middle-class lifestyle on an island where the cost of living was surprisingly high. Melinda earned about $48,000 from her perfume boutique work, which was respectable for her position. But the real wealth in my life wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the lives we created together. We had 2 children. Megan was 5 years old, with her mother's delicate features and an infectious laugh that could light up even the gloomiest of mornings. Tommy, our son, was only 3, still in that phase where the world was endlessly fascinating and terrifying at the same time. They were my reason for everything. They were the reason I got up in the morning. They were the reason I pushed myself at work. They were the reason I believed that life, despite its challenges and disappointments, was fundamentally worth living. At least they were back then. Everything changed about a year ago when Christopher moved into the apartment next to ours. He was a construction worker, a brigade leader at one of the companies building new hotels and entertainment centers throughout the island. He was always around, single, unattached, perpetually available. At first, I had no reason to suspect anything. When Melinda mentioned that he'd offered to help her hang a picture or fix a shelf in the bathroom, it seemed perfectly normal. He was our neighbor. We were all living in the same complex. Helping out with small repairs and maintenance was what neighbors did. I told myself that I was being paranoid if I felt even the slightest twinge of discomfort about it. That kind of thinking belonged to jealous men, controlling men I didn't want to be. So I dismissed the feeling and went about my life, confident that everything was fine. Confident that I was a good husband and a good father. Confident that our marriage, while perhaps not as passionate as it had been in the early days, was solid, stable, real. But then things began to shift. It started so subtly that I almost didn't notice it. Melinda stopped maintaining her appearance with the same care she once had. She'd always been meticulous about her weekly salon visits, getting her hair styled just perfectly before we'd go out on the weekends. Then she started skipping those appointments. Her hair would dry naturally, lose its shine, hang limp around her shoulders. She stopped wearing the perfume she usually did, the ones she'd blend herself at the boutique, the ones she was genuinely proud of. But then new clothes started appearing. Not expensive ones, nothing that would have set off financial alarm bells, but stylish in a way that was different from her usual preferences. Trendy pieces. Pieces that seemed designed to catch someone's attention in a specific way. I noticed them hanging in the closet, tags still attached, waiting to be worn. And then she started going out. "I'm going to meet up with some friends," she'd say as she reached for her keys. "I need to do some shopping," she'd announce the next time, already halfway out the door. "I'm running out to pick up some skincare products for work," she'd mention casually. Each excuse was different. Each one was plausible. Each one was probably at least partially a lie. My sister Sylvia, who helped watch the kids when Melinda went out, said something to me one afternoon that I tried my best to dismiss at the time. "Luke, she's been going out a lot more than she used to," Sylvia said, her voice careful, the way it gets when someone is about to deliver unwelcome news. "A lot. I don't remember her doing this before." "She probably just needs more space," I responded, defensive. "It's healthy. People need time for themselves." I'm not one of those jealous psychopath husbands who tracks his wife's every movement. But even as I said it, I was aware that I was protesting too much, defending myself against accusations that Sylvia hadn't made. She just looked at me with that expression that sisters perfect over years of experience, the expression that says they know you're lying to yourself and they're sorry about it but they're not going to push it. That night, I pulled up the Find My iPhone app on my phone. I'd installed it on Melinda's device months ago, back when we were both genuinely concerned about family safety. With 2 young children and the unpredictability of island life, it made sense to know where everyone was at any given moment. Or that's what I'd told myself and what I'd told her, and what she'd agreed to without hesitation because she had nothing to hide. She'd never had anything to hide. Or so I thought. The app showed me something interesting. The location history revealed that Melinda wasn't spending time at the boutiques and shopping centers she claimed to visit. She wasn't at her friend Stacy's house, where she said she was going. Instead, the GPS coordinates kept placing her at a specific location, the Queen Kapiolani Hotel, a 4-star establishment situated just 2 kilometers from our apartment. The Queen Kapiolani wasn't the kind of place you went for a casual afternoon. It was exactly the kind of place where affairs happened, where secrets were kept behind closed doors with a sea view. I'd even been there once for a corporate event, and I remembered thinking that it was beautiful in that expensive, impersonal way that high-end hotels always are. The first time I saw that location data, I actually laughed. I laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that has a hysterical edge to it, the laugh of a man who was beginning to understand something he desperately didn't want to understand. Then I started monitoring more carefully. The pattern became undeniable. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Sometimes she'd be there for an hour, sometimes for 90 minutes. Always during the afternoons, always while Sylvia was watching the kids. And then I noticed something else in the location history. She was sometimes going to another address entirely, an apartment building in the same neighborhood, only 5 minutes away by car. Christopher's address. The realization didn't hit me like a thunderbolt. It crept up on me slowly, like water rising in a locked room. Gradually, you notice your feet are wet. Then your ankles. Then your knees. By the time you realize the room is flooding, it's already too late to escape. I sat at my desk at work, staring at these GPS coordinates, watching the data that told the story of my marriage's destruction in numbers and locations and timestamps. My colleagues noticed I was distracted, but I made excuses about a difficult client or inventory issues. Nobody suspected that their coworker was silently falling apart in real time. I didn't want to believe it. I genuinely, desperately didn't want to believe what the data was telling me. But facts are cruel things. They don't care about your feelings or your preferences. They just sit there, objective and indisputable, forcing you to see reality as it actually is rather than as you'd prefer it to be. So I did what any modern man would do in my situation. I started investigating like I was some kind of amateur detective. I monitored the app obsessively. I kept detailed notes of when she left and when she returned. I calculated the time she spent at each location. I created a spreadsheet. Yes, a spreadsheet. The digital equivalent of a madman's wall covered with newspaper clippings and red string. I was at work when I heard someone mention the name Christopher in passing. It was during a lunch break, and a colleague named David was talking about a new development project on the island. Yeah, I was talking to my brother who works in construction, David said, settling into the chair across from me with his sandwich. He knows some of the guys on that new hotel project. Apparently there's this brigade leader, real popular guy, seems to date a different woman every month. My stomach turned. I barely touched my own food after that. That night I did something I'm not proud of. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Queen Kapiolani Hotel and waited. Sylvia was with the kids. I'd made an excuse about a client meeting that ran late. And then I saw them. They emerged from the glass doors of the hotel together, walking close, their hands occasionally brushing. Melinda was laughing at something he'd said, her head tilted toward his shoulder, her entire body angled in his direction. She was wearing one of those new dresses I'd seen hanging in our closet. She was wearing makeup that made her look like she glowed. I didn't recognize the expression on her face. I'd never seen that particular smile directed at me. Not in the last few years anyway. She smelled different when she came home that night. Not the perfume she usually wore. His cologne, I realized. Cedar and something else I couldn't identify, something that made me want to punch the wall. I didn't say anything. I went to the bedroom. I lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling until dawn broke across Honolulu, and then I stared at it some more. The next morning I called my lawyer. Edward was a sharp attorney, the kind of professional who understood that sometimes the law was less about justice and more about strategy. He'd been recommended by a colleague at work, and his first piece of advice to me was simple and direct. Gather evidence, he said during our first consultation. Everything. Bank statements, location records, hotel receipts, anything that documents the pattern. The stronger your documentation, the stronger your position. Edward mentioned the possibility of hiring a private investigator, but I declined. I had the phone tracking. I had the financial records. I had enough to work with. The financial records were, in fact, where things became truly devastating. I'd always paid attention to our banking, as was typical for the primary earner in a marriage. Melinda's salary went into our joint account along with mine. I handled the major bills: mortgage on our two-bedroom condominium valued at $680,000, utilities, insurance, the kids' education costs. What I hadn't paid close attention to were the small cash withdrawals and transfers Melinda was making. But when I sat down and started really looking at the statements, the pattern became horrifyingly clear. $300 here, $500 there. Sometimes $800 in a single day. These withdrawals had been happening consistently over the past 8 months. She was also making regular payments to the Queen Kapiolani Hotel. Never large amounts, always under the radar enough to not immediately attract attention, but consistent. There were charges from jewelry stores. There were airline tickets I'd never known about, short flights to nearby islands, presumably for getaways. In total, over the course of 8 months, Melinda had transferred approximately $28,000 from our joint account to fund her affair. $28,000. That was money I'd earned. That was money that was supposed to be for our children's education, for emergencies, for the future we were building together. That was money that represented overtime hours and difficult client calls and evenings working late when I could have been home playing with Megan and Tommy. Instead, it had gone to hotel rooms and expensive dinners and gifts for a man who was making her feel something that I apparently wasn't making her feel anymore. I felt something break inside me. Not dramatically, not with any perceptible sound, but something fundamental shifted in my chest, like a door closing that could never be opened again. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I started planning. Not with anger exactly, though there was certainly plenty of that. I was planning with cold precision, the same way I approached my business. Understanding the market, identifying the leverage points, executing a strategy that would give me the outcome I needed. Edward and I met twice more before I told Melinda anything. We discussed the process, the timelines, the likely outcomes. He explained how Hawaiian community property laws worked. Typically, everything acquired during the marriage was divided 50-50. But there were exceptions. Financial malfeasance, for instance, could affect property division. And there was always the matter of custody and the best interests of the children. Your wife abandoned her children for hours at a time to meet with this man, Edward said coldly. She left a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old alone in an apartment. In legal terms, that's neglect. That works in your favor. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would at hearing those words. What I did feel was numb. I told Melinda nothing for 3 more weeks. Instead, I played the role of devoted husband. I brought her flowers. I suggested we try a new restaurant. Suggestions she declined, citing tiredness or work stress. I held her hand while watching television. I was attentive and affectionate in a way I hadn't been in months, and the entire performance felt like I was acting in someone else's life. It was exhausting. During those 3 weeks, I visited a jeweler I'd known for years on Waikiki Street. I purchased diamonds and precious stones worth $40,000. I had them certified and transferred to my name through a financial advisor, setting up a structure that, while not illegal, would technically take them outside the community property considerations at the moment of divorce filing. Edward had advised this move. It wasn't ideal legally, but it was defensible. I also wrote a letter. The letter was addressed to the owner of the boutique where Melinda worked. I had my attorney's office send it, to add a layer of official distance. The letter detailed, with specific dates and times, instances of Melinda leaving her post during work hours for extended periods, sometimes 2 hours or more at a time, leaving the boutique unattended and affecting customer service. I included enough details to make it clear this wasn't just a casual observation. I included documentation. The owner investigated. They reviewed security footage. Every instance I'd cited was accurate. Melinda had, in fact, been leaving regularly. The owner couldn't have that. A boutique was about customer service, about being present for the clientele. 3 days after the investigation concluded, Melinda came home in tears. She'd been terminated. The owner had cited restructuring and staff reduction, but we both knew the truth. She wept at the kitchen table while Sylvia comforted her, and I made coffee and pretended this was the first I was hearing of it. I don't understand why they fired me, Melinda kept saying. I was good at my job. I was dedicated. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe through it. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click like if you enjoy this story. I always read your comments and analyze which stories you like best so that I can create better stories. Thank you. I will continue the story. But my orchestration wasn't finished. In fact, it had barely begun. I had a colleague at work, Tom, who worked in project management for one of the major construction companies on the island. Christopher's company. Tom owed me a favor from years back, something about a client contact who'd led to a significant deal. I called that favor in. I told Tom, speaking carefully and with apparent reluctance, that I had concerns about one of his company's brigade leaders. I mentioned that this individual, Christopher, had been having personal relationships with clients during work hours, which raised questions about professionalism and conflict of interest. I even gave him names. I described Melinda as a client who had been receiving special attention from Christopher, using the framework of him helping her with repairs and maintenance as cover for an inappropriate relationship. It was all technically true, just strategically presented. Tom did what any responsible manager would do. He initiated an investigation. He spoke with other crew members, reviewed schedule logs, and discovered that yes, Christopher had been taking extended breaks, sometimes disappearing from work sites during his scheduled hours. The company couldn't tolerate that. Christopher was put on notice. He was monitored more closely. Within a month, he voluntarily left the company and moved on to another construction firm. I told myself this was justice. That I was protecting my family, my future, my children's security. That these were reasonable consequences for infidelity and financial betrayal. The truth was more complicated and I knew it. The court proceedings began in April. The Hawaiian system was built on community property laws that mandated a 50-50 split of marital assets. Melinda's lawyers argued that the property and savings should be divided equally. Edward was relentless. He presented the financial statements. He showed the judge the pattern of transfers to the hotel, the jewelry purchases, the airplane tickets. He presented the location data from the phone tracking, which he carefully explained had been installed with Melinda's explicit permission and knowledge for family safety purposes. He then presented the part that made Melinda pale visibly. "Your Honor," Edward said, his voice steady and professional, "the respondent left a 5-year-old child and a 3-year-old child alone in a residential apartment, unattended, for extended periods to engage in this affair. On multiple occasions. The security logs from the apartment building confirm the children were alone during these times. This is, by definition, child neglect." He showed photographs of the apartment. He highlighted the gaps in supervision. He presented testimony from Sylvia, who detailed how often Melinda would disappear, leaving her to care for children who weren't technically her responsibility. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Morrison who had clearly seen every variety of marital dysfunction the island could produce, looked directly at Melinda. "You left your children alone?" she asked, and the disappointment in her voice was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Melinda tried to explain. She said it was never for long. She said she believed Sylvia could hear if something was wrong. She said it was just a few times. It didn't matter what she said. The judge awarded me primary custody of Megan and Tommy. 80%. Melinda could see them every other weekend and one weekday evening each week. But the children would live with me. The children would be primarily raised by me. Additionally, the judge awarded me $14,000 in compensation for the proven financial malfeasance. She ruled that while the condominium would be split according to community property laws, the diamonds and precious stones I'd purchased before the divorce filing were separate property and remained entirely mine. The settlement was structured in my favor in almost every meaningful way. Melinda left the courtroom with Christopher, who'd come to support her. They were together. They stayed together. I moved with Megan and Tommy to a different apartment in Waikiki, just 2 kilometers from the old place, but far enough that they wouldn't have to see the building where their mother used to sneak out to meet her lover. I wanted them to start fresh. I wanted them to begin their new normal in a space that wasn't tainted with memories of my anger, my investigation, my slow-motion destruction of the life I thought we were building together. The first few weeks were chaotic. Megan missed her mother, asked for her constantly. Tommy, being younger, adapted faster, which somehow made it worse. He cried the first night in the new apartment and then he just accepted it. A 3-year-old's resilience is both beautiful and heartbreaking. I threw myself into single parenthood with an intensity that surprised even me. I woke them up, made breakfast, packed lunches, took Megan to her pre-K program, managed Tommy with a nanny I hired 3 days a week. In the evenings, we'd go to the park near our new apartment. I'd push Tommy on the swings while Megan collected interesting rocks and shells. We'd have dinner together. I'd read them stories before bed. It was simultaneously the hardest and most rewarding thing I'd ever done. My job became secondary. I took a position that had more regular hours, fewer client dinners and late meetings. My salary decreased slightly, but the trade-off in terms of time with my children was worth every dollar I lost. Sylvia was my rock through all of this. She'd stay with the kids when I had to work late. She'd bring groceries. She'd sit with me on the apartment balcony in the evenings while I stared out at the ocean and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened. "You did what you had to do," she'd say whenever I expressed doubt about how I'd handled the revenge aspects of the situation. But I wasn't sure that was true. Through mutual friends, I heard rumors about how things were going with Melinda and Christopher. Apparently, living together brought reality crashing down on their romance. Without the hotel rooms and the secret meetings and the novelty, they were just two people who didn't actually know each other very well trying to build something real. Christopher started drinking more frequently. Jobs on construction sites came and went. Melinda couldn't find work in perfumery. The industry on the island was small enough that her reputation had become tainted. Eventually, she found employment at a perfume shop downtown, far from Waikiki, working retail at a position well below her previous status. I heard she looked tired. I heard she looked older. But I didn't take satisfaction in that the way I thought I would. Instead, I felt something closer to sadness. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition that everyone in this situation, Melinda, Christopher, myself, even my children, had lost something we couldn't get back. One evening, about 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Megan asked me a question that changed my perspective on everything that had happened. We were in her room and I was tucking her into bed. She held my hand and looked at me with those serious 5-year-old eyes that sometimes seemed far too old for such a young face. "Dad, are you angry at Mom?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to answer honestly, but I also wanted to protect her from the complexity of adult emotions and adult failures. "No, sweetheart," I finally said. "I'm not angry. But you don't live with her anymore." "No, we don't live together." "Is it because you don't love her anymore?" That question hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I thought about the woman I'd fallen in love with. The woman who smelled like expensive perfume and possibility. The woman who laughed at my jokes and held my hand at the movies and gave me 2 beautiful children. That woman still existed somewhere. She'd made terrible choices, but she hadn't ceased to exist. "I love your mother," I said to Megan. "I do. But sometimes people who love each other make choices that change everything. Not because they don't love each other. Sometimes for more complicated reasons that don't have good explanations. Do you understand?" Megan thought about this. "Will you ever live with Mom again?" "No," I said. "That's not going to happen. But your mother loves you. Tommy loves you. I love you. That part doesn't change." "My friend's parents are separated too," Megan said thoughtfully. "They fight all the time. His mom says his dad is a bad person." "Your mother and I don't think that about each other," I said carefully. "We're just people who made each other's lives harder instead of easier. That doesn't make either of us bad. It makes us human." I thought about my own childhood. My parents had been divorced since I was a kid. I remembered the fights. I remembered the tension. I remembered wondering if I'd done something to cause the separation. I'd promised myself, when I was old enough to understand what that promise meant, that I would never put my own children through that. Life, I was learning, doesn't care about promises you make to yourself. But what I could control was what happened next. I could control how I treated my ex-wife. I could control what I told my children about her. I could control whether I used them as weapons in an ongoing conflict or whether I tried, however imperfectly, to maintain a civil co-parenting relationship. The revenge I'd orchestrated, getting her fired, causing Christopher problems at his job, strategically destroying their relationship before it had a chance to solidify, it had all felt necessary at the time. It had felt like justice. But lying in the dark next to my daughter, listening to her breathe as she fell asleep, I understood that there was a difference between justice and revenge. Justice was supposed to repair things. Revenge was just about making other people hurt as much as you hurt. I'd chosen revenge. And now I had to live with that choice. The months that followed were about finding a new normal. A normal where I was both mother and father to my children. A normal where I worked enough to support us but not so much that I missed their childhoods. A normal where Melinda could see her children without me being consumed by rage at the sight of her. Christopher and Melinda's relationship continued, but with less intensity. They seemed to exist in a kind of stalemate, together because the alternative was even more lonely but not particularly happy about it. I heard they'd moved to a different apartment, farther from Waikiki, where the rent was cheaper. His construction jobs became less frequent. Her retail position paid barely enough to cover her share of expenses. I didn't track them anymore. I didn't monitor locations or financial records. I deleted the apps and removed myself from that part of my life. Sylvia had helped me understand that holding on to that anger was like holding a hot coal. The only person it was burning was me. About a year after the separation, Melinda reached out to me through email. She wanted to discuss a schedule change for the children. She wanted more than just the weekends. She wanted to rebuild her relationship with Megan and Tommy. My first instinct was to say no. My first instinct was to weaponize the custody arrangement and make her earn back my trust through suffering. But I thought about Megan's question. I thought about what it meant to be the kind of father I'd promised myself I'd be. I thought about what my children would need from both their parents as they grew older. I agreed to a modified schedule. More visitation time for Melinda, but structured and predictable. I maintained primary custody, but I allowed her genuine access to our children. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't sure I'd ever fully forgive the betrayal, the lies, the financial manipulation, the fact that she'd prioritized her pleasure over her children's well-being. But it was something like peace. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I could look at Melinda at school pickup events and parent-teacher conferences without feeling that overwhelming rage. We didn't talk much, but we could exchange information about the children without hostility. It wasn't friendly exactly, but it was civil. For the sake of Megan and Tommy, we both agreed to maintain that civility. Christopher had essentially disappeared from Melinda's life around the 18-month mark. I heard through the grapevine that he'd taken a job on a different island, and Melinda hadn't followed. She was focused on her children again, on rebuilding her life, on finding work that would support her properly. I didn't feel vindicated by his departure from her life. I felt strangely disappointed that my orchestrated revenge had worked so thoroughly. If I was being honest with myself, I'd wanted him to stay, wanted them to build something that would prove my revenge had been destructive but ultimately survivable. Instead he just left. And Melinda had to face the consequences of her choices without even the dubious comfort of having him by her side. Megan was in first grade now. She was thriving academically and socially. She asked about her mother less frequently, though she still loved her. Tommy had no real memories of his parents living together. For him, the separate households were just normal, the way life was structured. I'd started dating again. Nothing serious, but I was beginning to believe that I might be capable of building a healthy relationship with someone. I was working with a therapist, processing the trauma and rage and loss of the divorce. I was learning to distinguish between justice and revenge, between appropriate consequences and destructive vindictiveness. And I was learning to live with the knowledge that I hadn't exactly handled everything perfectly. One evening, as I was helping Megan with her homework, she asked me a question that I'd been avoiding thinking about for years. "Dad, what happened between you and Mom? Why did you really break up?" I could have given her the simple answer. I could have blamed Melinda entirely. I could have painted myself as the wronged party who'd simply responded appropriately to betrayal. But I was trying to do better. I was trying to be the kind of father who could admit complexity and nuance to his children, age appropriately, of course. "Your mother and I stopped being good for each other," I said carefully. "We both made mistakes. She made choices that hurt me very much. But I also made choices after I found out about those mistakes. Choices to hurt her back, to try to destroy her life the way I felt my life was being destroyed. Those weren't good choices." "What kind of choices?" Megan asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "I tried to make sure she lost her job," I admitted. "I tried to make sure her boyfriend would have problems at his work. I did these things because I was angry and hurt. Your mother made one set of bad choices. I made a different set. We both hurt each other. And ultimately you and Tommy hurt because we couldn't work through our problems like adults." Megan processed this. "Do you still love Mom?" "I love the person she was when I met her," I said. "I don't know if I love who she became. But I respect her for trying to be better now. And I'm trying to be better too. Being a grown-up is harder than I thought it would be when I was your age." Megan seemed satisfied with that answer. She went back to her math homework. But I could see that what I'd said had made an impact. I'd shown her that people, even the people you love most, even the people who hurt you most, are capable of being complicated. That being hurt doesn't give you the right to destroy someone else's life. That the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's building a better life for yourself despite the hurt. I thought about the choices I'd made in those dark months after discovering the affair. I'd been intelligent about it, strategic, effective. Every move had been calculated to damage Melinda and Christopher. And I'd succeeded. I damaged them both. But I'd also damaged myself. I'd become someone I didn't recognize. I'd orchestrated revenge when I could have simply divorced her and walked away with my dignity and my children intact. And now I had to live with that version of myself that existed alongside the version of me that tried to be a good father and a decent human being. They both lived inside me, contradictory and real and impossible to fully resolve. The only thing I could do was try to be better going forward. Try to model for my children what it meant to acknowledge wrongdoing, to take responsibility for your actions, and to work toward becoming someone you could respect. Thank you for watching this video. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. The screen now displays a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.